Hi everyone, my name is Leanne and today I'm bringing you my third top 10 best books of the year list. In 2020 I read more books than I ever had before, so naturally I read more amazing books than I ever had before, so rather than just putting all of them into a top 10 list, I decided to split it out into 3 top 10 lists. So I've already done a video on my top 10 children's books of 2020 and my top 10 non-fiction books of 2020. I will leave them linked down below in the description and in the cards if you want to check them out. But today, we are going to be talking about the top 10 fiction books, and these are fiction books for grown-ups. As with all of these top 10 videos, these aren't all books that were published in 2020, although some of them were. These are just books that I read in 2020. I have tried to put them in a top 10 order, so going from my 10th favourite to my absolute favourite, but if you asked me on a different day of the week, I would probably put them in a different order. Coming in at number 10 on the list is a book that has just snuck into my top 10, and that is Ghosts by Dolly Alderton. Now, this is an interesting one because I only read it in December, so it's very fresh. My response to it, my reaction to it is still quite new. I don't know if this book has the staying power of a favourite book. I feel like there were books on my top 10 list that I did halfway through the year that didn't make it onto these lists at the end of the year because they didn't have the staying power. And this hasn't been tested in that way. I don't know if I'm still gonna love this book in 5 or 6 months, but I did enjoy it so much that it has snuck its way onto the list. And it's interesting because I don't think this is objectively one of the 10 best fiction books that I've read this year, but I think it's definitely in my top 10 favourite books of 2020. And I think those are two different things, like the objective best and the subjective favourite. But this is a novel about a woman in her early 30s grappling with the usual things that you might expect from this kind of novel: her career, her friendships, her relationships. One of the main plot points of this book is her developing this really incredible relationship with a man and him then ghosting her, and it's about her reaction to that and her reflection on the nature of dating because of that. But it's also about lots of other kinds of ghosts. For example, her father is dealing with dementia. He's gradually forgetting lots of things, and it's about her coping with that and also the strain that it puts on the relationship between her and her mother. It's about her relationships with her friends and how their lives are going off in different ways. Some of them are starting to settle down and have kids. Lots of them are moving away from London, and this is a very kind of London-centric book. Like, there is a lot of stuff about what bit of London you live in and what it means when you move away from London, which is something that I really love in books, but I know it's not everyone's favourite thing. But the reason this has crept onto my favourites list was because I just felt it so personally. Like, as a young woman who is navigating dating and has had her fair share of shitty experiences, it just made me feel very seen. Dolly managed to articulate some things that I've never been able to put into words properly. It's interesting because I think a lot of the things she talks about are quite generic, but I do think that lends itself to a really interesting societal conversation about what dating is like at the moment. The fact that so many women are going through very similar horrible experiences. There were lots of things I tabbed in this book that I just really connected with. I thought this was wonderful. Next on this list I have The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary. Again, it's one where I'm like, yeah, it probably didn't have the most thrilling plot or amazing writing of the books that I've read this year, but God, I had a good time. And as I get older, the more I realise having a good time with books is something that I value very highly, way above amazing writing. In this book we follow the romance between Leon and Tiffy. They have quite an interesting living arrangement in that they share not only the same flat, but the same bedroom and the same bed, but they are there at different times. So Tiffy has quite a regular 9 to 5, so she has the flat in the evenings and the nights, whereas Leon, he works nights, so he has the flat during the day when Tiffy is at work. And for quite a long time they don't meet, they're just communicating through post-it notes and gradually building up this relationship and interest in one another. You do have to suspend your disbelief with this a little bit, but it is just so much fun. There are moments of tension and sexual chemistry which were lovely. It also dealt with some more serious topics as well, like Leon's brother who is imprisoned and Tiffy trying to get away from her very controlling, obsessive and abusive ex-boyfriend. And all of that stuff is just balanced so fantastically. I had such a fun time with this book, and Beth O'Leary is now a complete auto-buy author for me. I will read whatever she writes. Next on my list I have Scenes of a Graphic Nature by Caroline O'Donoghue. This is going to be the first of 2 appearances from this author on my top 10 list, so she is also a new auto-buy author for me. In this book we we are following a struggling filmmaker who has just made a film about her father's childhood. Her father was part of a disaster that happened in a small Irish community. He was the only survivor of a tragedy where a teacher and numerous school children were killed. And once she has made this film, she begins to realise that there's something missing in her father's narrative about what happened. So we follow her returning to her father's hometown to try and unravel what has gone on. We see how the people in this community react to her in different ways. We see the resistance that people have in her trying to uncover what exactly happened. I really loved how the idea of seeing your parents as complex figures more so than just, you know, your parents. I really loved how that was handled. I thought the mystery element of it was really page turning. It really kept you invested. And alongside that mystery plot, we're also following the friendship between our main character and her best friend and how there's tensions in that relationship and they've begun to drift apart. There's also fantastic queer representation in this book, which I am always hyped for. And yeah, I really enjoyed this book. Next, I have the shortest book that is on this list, and that is This Hostile Life. This is a fantastic group of short stories. I think there's only 3 or 4 stories in here. They are all about the experiences of people who have moved to Ireland from different parts of the world, the experiences of being a person of colour, of being an immigrant, of being an asylum seeker in Ireland, what it is like to live under the system of direct provision. Very quickly, to explain what direct provision is, it is a system of housing where people seeking asylum live in and basically have their whole lives controlled while their application is being processed. It's an awful system. It's a total human rights violation, and this collection really highlights that and gives voice to people who live in Ireland but aren't considered as citizens. I think this is just such an important book. You know, Ireland is so often depicted as this incredibly welcoming place, but when you look at something like direct provision, there's no way that you can say it is. I'm always interested in books that combat this idea of Ireland being this idyllic utopia, and the storytelling is just magnificent as well. Next, I have After the Silence by Louise O'Neill, another author who is one of my absolute favourites, and this is her first book in the thriller genre. It's quite similar to Scenes of a Graphic Nature in that it also involves a mystery set off the coast of Ireland in quite an isolated rural community, trying to solve that mystery many years later. They are quite different though, and the incidents are very different, the characters are very different, but it was just a really interesting reading experience, reading them fairly close to one another and loving them both. So the setup for this book is that there are 2 documentary filmmakers from Australia who have gone back to this island off the coast of Ireland where many years previously, a young woman was killed. There was a massive storm on the island where it was cut off from the mainland the night that she was killed. So if there was foul play involved, which seems highly likely, it had to have been someone who was on the island that night. And the Kinsella family are a family that have a lot of suspicion around their involvement in this girl's death. We are mainly following the book from Keelan's perspective. She is now middle-aged and she's obviously carrying some form of guilt. We just don't really know to what extent she was involved. And while we do have that quite page-turning mystery that's going on, this book is actually fundamentally a story about domestic abuse and what women will endure, and how in an abusive relationship control will start with such small things and then gradually work its way up. Louise O'Neill has this incredible control and command of her storytelling. That's something I found with all of her books. Like, they are just so fantastically written and superbly crafted. It's definitely not a thriller that has a shocking or twisty plot to it, but I think it's a really interesting and entertaining vehicle through which she can explore these ideas of domestic abuse. Next on my list, I have Summer Water by Sarah Moss. Sarah Moss is another writer who I've read a couple of books from before and really adore her writing, so I was really confident going into this one that I would think it's fantastic. So this is set in a Scottish cabin park. It's the longest day of the year in summer, but it is also torrential rain. And we follow 12 people who are all cooped up in this park, kind of dealing with their own issues, but also very much like curtain twitching and judging everyone else who is also cooped up in this park. In many ways they feel like interconnected short stories, but the way they come together is done really fantastically. There are lots of underlying themes about how we judge other people, particularly those from different backgrounds to us. Sarah Moss is such an observant writer. Like, she really notices the intricacies and nuances in how people behave and communicate, and there is this phenomenal underlying tension throughout the entire book that ultimately culminates in tragedy. It's a really short one as well. I read this in one sitting, and I think that's possibly the best way to consume this book if you can. Next, I have Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. It's difficult to talk about the sort of plot of this book. I'm sure you've heard the setup of this book, which is we are following a babysitter named Amira who is black. She babysits for a white family, and one night the mother phones her and asks, can she take the little girl that she babysits out of the house? So Amira takes this little girl, Briar, to a local supermarket to just kind of pass some time. And while she is there, she is accused by another shopper and a security guard of kidnapping the child because the child is white and she is black, and that's kind of the setup for this novel. But really what we go on to explore with this book is how damaging performative allyship can be, how people like Amira's employers, how Amira's boyfriend actually end up doing really damaging things despite having good intentions. It's a book about inequality and privilege and not being able to recognize your own privilege. It's a book about the tokenization of black people. One of the criticisms I've seen of this book is people saying that the discussions on race in this book don't go in depth enough. I find that such an interesting comment because Amira doesn't exist to teach white people about racism. She doesn't want to be made an example of, someone records what happens to her in this supermarket and says, oh, you've got to put it online. And Amira doesn't want to do that. She doesn't want to become an example. She just wants to get on with her life. This book doesn't need to be the be all and end all of fiction about race because you cannot encapsulate that in one book. I think it's silly to expect it to do that. This is just one young woman's story, and because she moves through the world as a black woman, that naturally intersects into her life. I thought all of the characters in this were crafted so well. They were fully fleshed out, fully formed, three-dimensional characters that had so much nuance to them and complexity to them, and there's no one character who it's like, okay, they're the good guy and they're the bad guy, except for maybe the kid. The kid's pretty much a good guy. All of these characters are flawed but also have redeeming factors to them. They just feel like true and honest people, and that's the thing that really made this book shine out to me this year. Next, I have This Green and Pleasant Land by Aisha Malik. This is a book that is set in kind of a small English town or village. We are following Bilal and his family, and on his mother's deathbed, she requests that he build a mosque in this town. And it's safe to say that ruffles a few feathers when he actually tries to do this. We see how the different people in this community react to him wanting to build a mosque, how there are people who are supportive of him, there are people who are kind of indifferent to it, and there are people who are very much fundamentally against this. We look at the real subtlety of the racism and prejudice that is targeted towards Bilal and his family. And I think the racism in these kind of small town communities can really be veiled and it's not immediately noticeable. Like, for example, everyone in this town calls him Bill. Nobody in his family calls him Bill. They call him Bilal because that's what his name is. And it's little things like that, and how so many people in this community are totally accepting of there being a Muslim family in this village, as long as they're not massively aware of the fact that they are Muslim. It's super insightful, and while it is dealing with this quite large topic, there are also really wonderful moments of tenderness and intimacy in this book. It has so much of the charm and warmth you would expect from a book that is set in this small village community, and it really explores what these communities are in modern Britain. It's very clever, it's very thoughtful, and I think it's one that will appeal to a lot of different kinds of readers as well. Number 2 on this list, although I did say if you asked me on a different day I would put these books in a different order, is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This was a book that I had heard nothing but incredible things about before I read it, and that kind of intimidated me. I was like, oh no, I'm gonna be the one person that doesn't like this book. No, I loved it. Phenomenal. In the 1970s, we are following our main character Dana, who is a black woman. She is a writer. She is transported back to the 1800s where a child is in danger, and she saves this child. She doesn't know why she's been transported to this place, but it's just her natural instinct to help a child out in need. As the novel progresses, she goes back to her present day and then back into the past at different points throughout history. And because she is a black woman at this time, she is assumed to be a slave. This puts her in so much danger. She has to endure some really horrible stuff. And gradually she realizes that the reason she is being transported back in time is because this little boy who we see grow up, he is actually one of her ancestors, and that's why she needs to keep saving him. The dynamic between these two characters is so interesting because you do see them forming a bond and attachment to one another, despite the fact that this little boy, and eventually man, is horrible to her. He does so many awful things, but she does feel protective over him. It's incredibly told. I was slightly intimidated by the sci-fi elements to it, but really the time travel is just a way of exploring things about race and gender, about power dynamics, and ultimately humanity. This book has so many layers to it and so much that prompts discussion. It's utterly incredible. If you are someone like me who has had this book on your radar for quite a long time and just hasn't picked it up yet, I strongly urge you to. It will not disappoint you. It's fantastic. And my favourite book of the year, you may remember that many books ago I mentioned that there would be another Caroline O'Donoghue book on this list, and this is Promising Young Women. This is my favourite book of the year. Like, I can't. Not only is this, like, objectively fantastically written, and fantastic plot, and fantastic characters, subjectively, I felt so much. You know, when a book, like, really gets under your skin. In this book we are following Jane, who is an adrift woman in her 20s, navigating career, friendships, relationships. She enters into a relationship with a man that she works with. He is essentially her boss. He is married, so she becomes the other woman, and it's about how conflicted she feels about that, but also how she feels about this man, the attachment that she feels to him. And we see bit by bit how he grasps control over her life and weaves this web whereby if she speaks out about what is happening and how he ends up mistreating her, then she still doesn't win. He still wins. Jane's friendships and her sanity, her relationship with herself, her relationship with alcohol, they all begin to spiral. Essentially, this man just fucks up her whole life. It's such a remarkably honest book. I don't think I have ever underlined so much in a book as I did with this one. It's so closely observed. There's so much intelligence in this writing and empathy and understanding of the way humans behave and how that behaviour isn't always rational. I do read a lot of books that are in this kind of vein of, like, you know, millennial woman figuring her shit out, but like this one is just, it's so good. It's so standout and fantastic, and I want to push this book into everyone's hands. So that is it. They are my top 10 fiction books that I read in 2020. They will all be linked down below in the description if you want to find out more about them. Do leave me a comment and let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought of them, or what your favourite book of 2020 was, or if you want to just leave me an emoji so I know that you're here, please do. It has been such a great reading year. I do have a couple of more kind of end of year reflections, goals, statistics, resolutions, all those kinds of things coming up, so you have those to look forward to. But I'm so glad that I did 3 different favourites videos. Please don't expect this every year because it was a lot of work. Anyways, that's all I'm going to talk about today. I hope you guys are doing well, and I will talk to you in my next video.